A modern pint glass, foamy and golden, slowly fills. But what if I told you that beer, one of humanity's oldest pleasures, was first brewed over 5,000 years ago in the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, long before modern breweries, stainless steel vats, or even the wheel? Today, we're not just talking about history, we're bringing it back to life. You'll learn how the Sumerians, the inventors of writing and civilization itself, also created the world's first ale. We'll uncover how ancient brewers turned bread into beer, how they worshipped the goddess Ninkasi, and how her ancient hymn secretly doubled as the world's earliest brewing recipe. And then we'll do what no Mesopotamian could, we imagined. We'll recreate that beer right in your modern kitchen using simple ingredients you can find today. So grab a bowl, roll up your sleeves, and let's travel back in time to the cradle of civilization, where beer was more than a drink. It was a sacred connection between people, gods, and grain. Chapter 1. Beer before civilization, the origins of fermentation. Before cities, before kings, there was fermentation. Long before history was written in clay or stone, something remarkable was happening in the river valleys of the Fertile Crescent. Archaeologists have found traces of ancient brewing, microscopic residues of malted grain and yeast, dating back as far as 10,000 BCE. This was the age when humans first began to settle, plant seeds, and store food. And in the process of soaking and grinding barley for bread, something magical happened. Wild yeast, drifting invisibly through the air, landed on the damp grain and began to feed. Within days, the mixture started to bubble, release a sweet aroma, and transform itself into something entirely new. The first beer wasn't crystal clear or carbonated. It was murky, thick, and slightly sour, but it was alive. It was the world's first fermented beverage, discovered by accident yet destined to shape civilization. But this was more than a happy accident. It was a revolution. Fermentation meant preservation. Grain that would otherwise spoil could now be transformed into a nutritious, long-lasting drink. It was safer than water, which was often contaminated, and it packed both calories and nutrients. Early humans may not have understood the chemistry, but they understood the feeling. Beer nourished, sustained, and, yes, lifted their spirits. As centuries passed, this bubbling brew became woven into daily life. By around 4000 BCE, in the lands of Sumer, modern-day southern Iraq, beer had become the drink of the people. Everyone drank it. Farmers after long days in the fields, priests during temple rituals, and even children with their meals. It wasn't poured into glass mugs or served cold. Instead, beer was thick, cloudy, and unfiltered, more like a liquid bread than a modern lager. People would gather around large clay pots filled with the brew, using long straws made of reeds to sip from the surface. This communal act of drinking wasn't just practical, it was social. It bound people together in work, in worship, and in celebration. Beer wasn't just a drink, it was currency. Ancient tablets tell us that the workers who built Mesopotamia's great temples and towering ziggurats were paid in daily beer rations. A typical laborer might receive 2 liters a day, sometimes more. The quality of the beer even reflected one's status. A stronger, sweeter brew for the priests and nobles, a lighter one for common workers. So when we say beer built civilization, it's not a metaphor, it's literal. Beer motivated labor, stabilized agriculture, and encouraged the cultivation of grain. It turned wild barley into a crop worth growing, protecting, and trading. And as agriculture spread beyond the Tigris and Euphrates valleys, brewing followed. From Mesopotamia to Egypt, and later across the ancient world, every society adapted beer to its own taste and environment. It was a shared discovery, a bridge between cultures and centuries. The simple act of fermenting grain had become the liquid foundation of civilization itself. Every glass we raise today owes something to that ancient, bubbling bowl of barley. Chapter 2. The goddess of brewing, Ninkasi, and the hymn that taught the world to brew. Every culture has its gods of fire, water, and earth, but only one civilization worshipped the goddess of beer, Ninkasi. To the Sumerians, she wasn't simply divine. She was the very spirit of fermentation, the force that turned humble grain into a drink worthy of gods and kings. Her story is told in one of humanity's oldest surviving poems, the Hymn to Ninkasi, inscribed on a clay tablet nearly 3,900 years old. This wasn't just a song of praise. It was also a recipe, a detailed set of brewing instructions encoded in worship. It begins, "You are the one who waters the malt set on the ground. The noble dogs guard it. You are the one who soaks the malt in a jar. The waves rise, the waves fall." These poetic lines describe the entire brewing process, from germinating grain to fermenting the mash. The hymn bridges myth and method, turning everyday labor into sacred ritual. Central to Ninkasi's brew was Bappir, a twice-baked barley bread. To the Sumerians, bread and beer were two sides of the same miracle, one solid, one liquid. They baked Bappir hard and dry, so it could be stored for months, then crumbled into water and mixed with malted barley to begin fermentation. There were no thermometers, no hops, and no controlled yeast cultures. The brew relied entirely on wild yeast from the air and the brewer's environment. This meant each batch was unique, a reflection of time, place, and divine favor. The result? A sweet, thick, slightly tangy drink, something between porridge and ale. It wasn't clear or carbonated like our beers today. It was dense, hearty, and full of nutrients, consumed daily by farmers, priests, and nobles alike. But beer was never just a beverage. It was a prayer in liquid form. Every sip honored Ninkasi, and through her, the life-giving power of grain and water. Brewing was sacred work. When Sumerian women stirred their vats, they sang her hymn aloud, turning each batch into an act of devotion. In these ancient breweries, there were no clocks or scientific instruments. Time was marked by taste, smell, and intuition. The rising bubbles were seen as Ninkasi's own breath, proof that she was present and blessing the brew. The hymn even ends with celebration, reminding the drinkers to lift their cups and give thanks to the goddess who made it all possible. So, when we talk about beer as culture, it's not just a metaphor, it's literal. In Mesopotamia, brewing connected people to their gods, their land, and each other. It was art, science, and spirituality blended into one. And today, nearly 4,000 years later, we're about to follow in their footsteps, reawakening Ninkasi's ancient recipe in our modern world. So gather your grain, warm your water, and ready your hands. Because the hymn of Ninkasi is more than a relic. It's a living tradition waiting to rise again in your very own kitchen. Chapter 3. Ingredients of the Gods. Sourcing. Ancient flavors today. Before we brew, we must gather what the Sumerians once used, the raw gifts of the earth that shaped their sacred drink, but we'll do it the modern way, using simple ingredients you can find in any kitchen. First comes barley, the backbone of Mesopotamian beer. It was their most important crop, grown in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Barley is what gave their beer its body, its flavor, and its strength. For our version, you can use whole-grain barley or malted barley. The latter will give you a smoother, sweeter taste. If you're feeling authentic, try lightly toasting the grain to bring out a rustic, ancient aroma, just as Sumerian brewers did under the sun. Next, we need Bappir, the twice-baked barley bread that served as the foundation for their brewing. Imagine something between a granola bar and hardtack, a dense, dry loaf made from barley flour, honey, and dates. It was baked once to cook, then again to preserve. This bread could last for months, making it a portable form of stored grain and the perfect base for beer. We'll recreate it by mixing barley flour, crushed dates, honey, and a little water. Bake it twice until it's dry and tough. This is the ancient brewer's secret ingredient. the bread that turns back into liquid gold. Then dates, the soul of Sumerian sweetness. Dates were sacred in Mesopotamia, a symbol of fertility and abundance. They used them in everything: food, medicine, offerings, and of course, beer. When fermented, dates don't just sweeten the brew. They add richness, depth, and the natural sugars that feed the yeast. In ancient tablets, entire beer varieties were named after dates. Date beer was a mark of quality, an offering fit for gods and kings. Our final key ingredient, water. The Sumerians drew theirs from mighty rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, sources of life and danger alike. We'll use filtered or spring water, clean and neutral in taste, to let the grains and fruit shine. Water may seem simple, but in brewing it's sacred. It carries the flavor of the land itself, just as it did 5 millennia ago. Now here's where ancient tradition meets modern choice. You can rely on wild yeast, letting nature guide your fermentation, or you can introduce a bit of sourdough starter or brewing yeast to give it a reliable boost. The ancients left it to the wind. You get to choose your destiny. Hold each ingredient in your hand: barley, bread, dates, water. These are more than groceries. They are time capsules connecting you directly to the first brewers who stirred clay vats beneath Mesopotamia's blazing sun. Their tools were simple, their process humble, but their result, a living, bubbling miracle, changed the course of human history. Chapter 4. From Bread to Brew, Recreating Bappir. In ancient Sumer, beer began not in barrels or bottles, but in the oven. Every brew started with bread. Bappir, the twice-baked foundation of the world's first ale. To the Sumerians, this bread was more than food. It was the bridge between grain and beer, between the human and the divine. Let's bring it back to life. Start by mixing barley flour with crushed dates and a drizzle of honey, just enough water to form a thick, sticky dough. In Mesopotamia, this mixture symbolized abundance: barley for sustenance, dates for sweetness, honey for divine favor. Shape the dough into small, round loaves about the size of your palm. Place them on a baking sheet and bake once at 180 degrees or 350 degrees for about 30 minutes until firm but not browned. This first bake cooks the grain and sets the flavor. Then comes the secret of preservation. Bake the loaves again, slower, longer, until they're dry, hard, and almost stone-like. The second bake removes every trace of moisture, turning the Bappir into a rock-solid bread that could be stored for months without spoiling. Ancient brewers made Bappir in huge batches, keeping it ready for whenever they wanted to brew. It was their beer base, their insurance against famine, and their most sacred ingredient. Now, the magic begins. Once your Bappir has cooled, crumble it into a large pot. Add a handful of malted barley for extra depth of flavor, and pour in warm water, not boiling, just enough to coax life from the grain. As you stir, imagine the same motion repeated thousands of years ago in clay vats under the Mesopotamian sun. The scent of barley and dates rises, the same scent that filled temple courtyards and village kitchens long before recorded history. Now, let time do its work. As the mixture cools, wild yeast from the air begins to feed on the sugars. Within hours, you'll see tiny bubbles forming on the surface, signs that fermentation has begun. These bubbles are life, their history reborn in your kitchen. Cover the pot loosely with a cloth or lid, allowing air to flow while keeping dust away. Let it sit at room temperature for 3 to 5 days, stirring once a day to release gases and keep the yeast active. There's no need for thermometers or modern brewing tools. The Sumerians didn't have them, and yet they mastered this art through observation and instinct. They trusted the signs, the warmth of the liquid, the scent in the air, the rhythm of the bubbles. As the days pass, the aroma deepens. Sweet, malty notes blend with the faint tang of fermentation. What you're smelling is history itself, The same fragrance that once drifted over ancient cities, mingling with incense, clay, and river wind. No stainless steel, no carbonation, just grain, water, yeast and time, working together as they did 5,000 years ago. And when it's ready, your brew will be alive with the same spirit that animated the first civilization, the spirit of Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. Chapter 5. Fermentation and flavor, tasting time travel. After a few days, the transformation is complete. What began as bread and water is now beer, a living, breathing beverage from the dawn of time. Strain the mixture through a sieve or cheesecloth. What remains is liquid gold, slightly clouded